Today, we're talking about sales in content because that's why you're making it. Ultimately, you put it out there to build the audience to convert those people. And joining us for this sales conversation is Rob Jager. Now, Rob is going to talk a lot about understanding people on a deeper level, the way that you communicate with them, and how that can guide people through this process to make a sale really simple. We also talk about things of how to deal with multiple stakeholders, for example, or how to not be pushy. So a lot of things with sales. Here's our conversation. So Rob, I've made all this content, I've got an audience, I've got a business, and I'm looking to sell, but I don't know what to do. Where should I even begin? What should I do first?
That's the hardest part, right? I mean, once you have somebody coming in, you get the lead, now what? That's the problem. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
I've got the lead and I don't know what to do. What should I do?
Yeah. So one of the things that I've always found is really helpful is really to start with understanding a little bit of disc and disc profiles and so forth, because I feel like people really like to buy things from people that they enjoy talking with, like to be with. And so, you know, when you think about personalities, who do you like to hang out with? People that you just kind of click with, right? And so by early on as possible, I always try to figure out what is it that is something that I can connect with them on. And I know that's kind of cliche, right? Like, oh, they have pictures of they're on a boat, they're fishing. They must like fishing. So I'm going to talk about that. I'm not talking about that kind of stuff. I'm talking about very early on trying to figure out, are they a high D personality? Are they an S personality? Are they a C? Are they an I? Or are they a combination? Because once you start to understand that, then you start speaking to them in their language. That, to me, is the most powerful piece. That's how I start.
Yeah, and so, I mean, break that down a little bit more, because like I've heard about disc profiles, but for people who have not and don't have a deeper understanding, what is a disc profile and what are some of the layers to that?
Yep. So I was recently in a conversation with somebody. They were trying to figure out how to train their sales team, and one of the things that I asked them was about, you know, how much do they use disc, and she didn't really know enough about it. So I started to explain to her that the way that the premise of it is really everybody has one primary personality profile on the disc profile. So it's a D, I, S, and a C. That's why it's called disc, right? So the D stands for dominant personality, and basically the dominant personality is the person that is. Have you ever met one of those kinds of people? They're hey, all right, ready, fire, then shoot, then aim, right? They're like, okay, what just happened? Like they're go. They want to lead first. They want to be the ones that are out in the front, and so they're driven by something that's innate in them of being not in control. And so when they're driven by not being in control, they take control. And their personality makes them say, okay, I'm going to do this. I'm going to decide this for you, and you're going to do it for me. And so when you start dealing with somebody that's in that personality trait, you're going to want to start to think of things as you go through your conversation, start to make them answer questions that are related to how they're going to make decisions. What do you need to see? And you need to speak quickly with them, right? So you get a D personality, you're dealing with them in a meeting, you're going to talk to them pretty fast. You're going to not mince words. You get right to the point. And they want the bottom line. They want to know, what's this going to do? What's the bottom line? How's it going to help me? How's it going to make me look good, basically, right? So have you dealt with something like that?
Oh yeah, I've definitely seen people like that.
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah. So that loss of control is the thing that they're afraid of. And so they are driven by some of that. And when you talk to them in terms of you're in control by giving them those decisions and making them understand, they feel like you get them. They feel like you're not getting in their way. You're not trying to undercut them. You're not subservient to them, but you're guiding them to make decisions quickly.
Yeah, I mean, it totally makes sense, and that's in the way of, look, you need to know how to communicate with people, because obviously, you know, part of it is that shared connection of just, I like this person, but it's also, they do understand me, they understand my way of thinking, so they can provide the answers in a way that are relevant to me in the way that I approach my problems, and everything lines up. You want to build rapport with people, you want to understand who you're talking to, and establish the sort of ground rules of the solution in a way that fits them. So now that I've done that, let's say I've done that successfully, I'm starting to get this good relationship going. I've read their profile essentially, like and not like fully read, but like, I understand them. And now we're on to the next. So what would be the next sort of thing I would start to consider at this point in the process?
So the next thing I would consider, it's still on the disc a little bit, is their secondary profile. So people can have a secondary one. And so that one is less driving them, let's say, but they then have the secondary piece that you need to address. So if I'm talking to a D but also has a C personality, or vice versa, a C then a D, they're needing data, but they're going to make decisions rather quickly. Which is a little bit contradictory, because C's and D's don't make decisions quickly at the same speed. Let's put it that way. So a C would be slower. So if they have a primary C and a secondary D, you're going to know that once they have the data, they're going to decide quick. But if it's the reverse, they may not, right? So there's different things that you need to kind of start to play with. That's one piece. The next piece after that, I like to think of as, are they visual people? Do they talk in terms of visual stuff? So I see what you're saying, or I saw this one time, or I can visualize that, or they're saying things that are visual related, right? So when somebody starts saying things a lot the same way that are visual related, they're visual people. So, and by the way, vast majority of people are visuals. A lot of people are visuals. And then the second one is auditory. So the auditory people, they say stuff like, I hear what you're saying. And simple phrases like that, anything related to that, do you hear me? I don't quite hear it that way. That sounds different to me, right?
I never considered it on that nuanced level of just as simple as I see what you're saying and I hear what you're saying, but that people actually make that conscious decision to choose which one of those two they'll use for that idea.
Yes.
Wow.
And as a person who's got a lead and you're going through this process and learning each other and you're speaking through all of this stuff, you listen to them and they start saying that. When you get to a point where you have to ask questions, you're asking a question back that they would ask. You would say, how does that sound to you? If that's how their primary is, right? You're going to say it back to that way so that they hear and feel comfortable with you. It's nuanced, but it's true. The third one is not so much auditory or visual, or auditory or visual. The third one is a kinesthetic person. And these are a little more rare, but the kinesthetic person will say something like, I don't quite grasp what you're saying. They're physical, feel, tactile. So they may be the type of person that says, my gut tells me this is not the right move. And when they say that, that should be a cue to you. How often do you ever hear somebody say, my gut doesn't feel right? I don't. Yeah, you don't hear that very often. But when you do, you should be ooh, this is a kinesthetic person. And you need to think about questions that relate in that way. So I know it's crazy, but it's true, and it's subtle. And you should use it subtly, right? And don't do it overdo it. So still use a mix, but what you need to do is adjust.
Yeah, and it feels like almost a balance of when you're doing that too much, it feels fake, patronizing. You know what I mean? Like there's things about it that can totally go sideways, because then it's like that's not who you are, and it's almost like, hey, I'm trying to exploit you. So people are going to naturally recoil. I guess the thing that I'm trying to process, because I've been in this space now where I'm talking to a lot of different people and doing it with this sales mindset, and it's just hard to grasp. Like how do you process all of this in the sense of not only like the disc profile and then the secondary disc profile, and then having them move through the system? Like, do you have like decision trees of how you're managing this? Like, how do you make these decisions? Where is there a process for this? Like, how do you? I have no idea.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Actually, I think what it comes down to, first being a little bit aware. So you're aware of what the disc profiles are. And if you really have to study it a lot. Like it takes a lot of time to really ingrain yourself into knowing what they are. And once you know those things, then you start to hear things from that other person or see things from the other person. And you start to realize, you really start to realize that that's what that person is. And then you say, okay, if that's the case, every one of my communications should match some of that element that they're looking for and that they need. It's not a matter of manipulating; it's a matter of communicating in the way that they really enjoy working with, and that that's their comfort zone. When I started this, my mentor did my disc profile, and I was off the chart C at the time. And he said to me, that's great, but here's the problem. The problem is your tendency is to never adjust. So once a C, always a C, you never adjust in conversations. And I was like, what do you mean? He goes, you don't care if the other person's an S and doesn't need the details. You're going to give them the details anyway. And I'm like, yeah, that's kind of true. But once he said to me, learn this, all these different disc profiles, and I started to learn that, it opened my eyes. I was like, oh wow, this person is never going to make a decision without including their VP of and this person and that person because they can't make a decision on their own. And so I started to go, oh, okay, I should probably figure out disc. And then when we had those conversations, I would say, you probably need to speak to so and so and so and so, right? Yeah, I do. Okay, what do you think they're going to ask you? What do you think they're going to say? So you start working them through it. What happens if they say no? What are you going to say? What if they say yes? Is that a good enough, or do you need more information? Right? So you start to play around with how do I play in their sandbox in a sense and get them to understand that all the ways that their dynamics affect their decision making as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's so interesting because one of the things that I feel like I have a good job of just generally reading people and building enough for rapport. I've just got like a ton of weird life experience and interests in whatever. So my ability to understand like some level of I think this is going to connect or it's not going to connect. Okay, let me try something else. And being able to get there, I tend to do a pretty good job with that. I think the thing that I then overanalyze into oblivion is like the actual process of things beyond that, right? Because then it's like, okay, I've built this relationship, and then it really does become that sales emphasis. Like, how are there things along the way where, okay, first I'm going to do this thing, and then this thing, and then that thing. And to give you an example of this, so coming from a sports background, right? It's like, if I'm an NFL head coach, I've got a playbook. You run these plays. They're very specific. There's like, if this thing happens, you do this, and if this thing happens, you do that, and that's it. So on some level, I try to think like, okay, well, I feel like I understand this person, but I don't have like a playbook or enough plays to go and then execute to score. You know what I mean? Like that's kind of my problem then is starting to then integrate it or find ways to naturally integrate that sales experience into the relationship building is really where the struggle starts to, bubble up, if you will. And so like, what are some things then as you're doing the relationship building on that like practical sales side of momentum to move them through? What are some things I should be thinking about considering as I do that?
Well, I mean, I think it's just a matter of expanding it and looking at it as you're building a relationship because when you're doing sales, you're building a relationship and you're moving them towards an end goal or end game, right? But I also feel like part of that process is understanding where they want to go. And so I always try to figure out what is the problem that they're trying to solve. And if I'm asking all the right questions as I go and I've learned their personality, I now know that if I ask certain questions, I'm going to pull out some pain, if you will, right? And so I start to learn this is what they're trying to solve. And by the way, I don't know if anybody's ever told you this before, but I'm sure somebody has. But the first thing they tell you is never the actual problem. So when you've had a call and you're like, well, I just want to expand. For you, like you're helping people grow their podcast, right? So I just want to be able to sell more product. Okay, why? And then they tell you something else. Okay, yeah, but what about? And you start digging, and you realize it's actually for this person, it's ego, or for that person, it's full on profit, or for this person, it's I want to be known everywhere. Like it's a variety of things, but whatever their thing is what's important to them, not what's important to you.
Yeah. No, it is fascinating in that way because I think everything that I have in those kinds of conversations, it's almost like the WebMD phenomenon of like everybody self-diagnoses.
Yeah.
And so they get to you, and then once they do, then it's like, oh yeah, I have this problem, and it's like, okay, I need to verify that you have this problem. So okay, I'm going to check your heart rate, I'm going to check your pulse, I'm going to hit your knee with that hammer, and no, you have a strategy problem. Like you have no idea, you're focused on downloads, and you shouldn't even care about downloads to begin with necessarily. Like so, those are the kinds of things for sure, and I'm definitely doing a better job of asking those questions to dig at those things. I think the uncomfortable part of it, Rob, at some level, and so the lack of experience that comes with it is leaning into the pain. It's like it feels on some level. I've always been. I don't know, taught with like social grace of not leaning into problems and all, if anything, burying problems. And you know what I mean? So it's not this natural thing to go, oh, you're having a problem? Please tell me
Yes,
more.
tell me
Like
more.
I'm not, you
Yes.
know what I mean? But
Yes.
it's so true. Like everything seems to be this idea of pain. And so like how do you I don't know, how do you artfully, reasonably talk to people about the pain and build the relationship on that?
Yeah, so that's the hard part. So a couple things. One, first of all, you got to be nurturing when you do it. You've got to be nice, right? You got to make them feel like they're comfortable. Otherwise, they will not. So this is kind of one of those components of, you think about, let's put it this way. When you were a kid, you fell down, you bumped your knee, you skinned your knee, you're crying, and mom asks you or dad asks you, what happened? And then you tell them, and they're like, oh, that hurts, doesn't it? They're nurturing you. They're making you feel like it's okay. You're going to be okay, right? Versus, what if mom and dad said, well, get up. What did you do? You're not going to make them feel that. You don't want to make them feel that way, right? Why did you ride your bike that way? You shouldn't have run into a tree. No kidding, I'm not supposed to run into a tree. But that's what I did. Right? So anytime you're talking to somebody with pain, you got to be nurturing. So that's first thing. Second thing, it's being curious. I have found, regardless of the situation, I'm always curious because every story is a little different. So even though I may have heard this story 5 times before, a version from somebody else, the reality is their version is different, and I got to find out what the difference is. And so when I start asking questions, it's about finding the differences and understanding what they're driving towards or what their pain that they're trying to solve or get away from.
If you're looking for more ways to grow your business through podcasting, sign up for the SBX newsletter. The link is right here in the show notes, and each week in your inbox, you're going to get tips, opinions, strategies, all the things that we talk about here on the show in your inbox. The SBX newsletter right here in the show notes.
It's not always easy to project ignorance, but I'm getting very comfortable being ignorant in a sense.
Yes.
Of like, I don't know your business. I don't understand your problems. Like I'm just some wonderful, happy-go-lucky dope, and I would just love to hear what's going on with you. And I don't understand. Yep. Please teach me. And I think that's one of the things that's been successful as I've seen it so far is just, hey, I literally have no idea what the concept of that is. And so can you explain that to me further? I genuinely would like to know. It's pretty amazing what people are willing to break down and do in detail because they feel like, oh, yes, I am educating this person. And you are being educated. I mean, I don't know about their exact office structure or whatever it is. You know what I mean? Like it's all new.
Yeah. Well, I mean, think about it in terms of, have you ever met a person who doesn't want to talk about themselves? Ever. They always want to talk about themselves. So you start asking them questions. Oh, you want to learn about my business, or you want to learn? Oh, I'll teach you. I'll tell you more. They want to talk about it. So I'm never at a loss for words on the other end where they don't want to talk to me. I rarely have that. And by the way, if I do get that where they don't want to answer the questions, they're not buying. I can tell because they're like, well, I don't know, or they don't give you a very good straight answers. It means they either haven't thought about it or it's really not an issue. So if I get into the numbers problems and boy, it sounds like this is something you want to fix, but maybe I'm wrong. Or how much is this, like if this is a problem and it causes a problem for you, how much is that costing you every day? And if it's a legitimate question and they're legitimately interested, they'll tell you. If they're not, they're not. And that's how you can distinguish between a good buyer or somebody just kicking tires. And kicking tires, fine, no problem. At some point, you have to just tell them, it sounds like now's not a good time. And that's okay.
Yeah. And that makes a lot of sense. So then from that standpoint, because we're kind of talking around then the concept of closing people, right? So I've built this relationship with them. I'm getting to know them and understand them and their way of thinking and expressing the problem. I'm driving into the pain points as I'm doing all of this to make them aware of, hey, well, here's what we do and here's how we solve that problem and what that looks like. And so now that I've walked them to this point where it comes to like getting the proposal out and finalizing things, I mean, what are some of the things, like generally speaking, that we should be mindful of when it comes to a point of closing a deal with a lead?
So first of all, I would recommend never close a lead. And by that, I mean, they should close themselves. I end every conversation where I'm getting ready, they should be saying yes or no, is we have the estimate, proposal, whatever. We write it all out. It's in their language. It has the words, see, or it feels, or whatever, right? It has things that related to their pain in there, talking about this is going to solve this problem. We're going to be doing these activities to relieve this stress or this problem. It's going to cost this much, or this is going to prevent this kind of expenditure on your end. What we're going to do is going to move this expense, blah, 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 blah. And at the end of that conversation, it's the question becomes, what do you want to do now? What should we do next? And they should say yes or no, because we've trained them or taught them in our conversations that as we go through each step, we're taking one step at a time, and you can say no at any time. And if we're going to continue on this journey together, at the end, it's going to be a yes or a no. And I don't take anything other than that. It's either yes or no. I don't want a maybe, because at some point, maybe means no, and that's okay. And I'll tell you, you said maybe, no problem, means no to me. And so all of that leads up, yes, but in the end, it should reflect if there's a pain of $1,000 a day, the cost should outweigh that pain. Their investment should be like, this is a no-brainer. If I'm going to spend $20,000, but every day I wait, it costs me $1,000 a day. So in 20 days, I'm breaking even. I'm in, right?
Yeah.
It's all relative.
So, okay. So, and in those points, does it normally feel like, because getting to that question where you just go, so what's next? I mean, it feels like at that point, you've just exhausted everything, right? Like there's been extensive conversation that's gotten to that point. It's got to be a lot.
Yeah, I mean, enough. They've answered. I mean, all along the way, it's what other questions? What other questions? Who else needs to be involved, right? That's another piece. Like if I'm talking to somebody and they're not bringing in their vice president of whatever, if it's their marketing person or whatever, then they're still not going to be able to make a decision on their own. Then I need to make sure that they're in the table with us.
Yeah, and that's one of those things that I've been dealing with now as I've moved from, because we have a lot of conversations with, the coaches, consultants, smaller businesses, and like that's really direct, and there's really not other people involved most of the time. But then as I've now started to have conversations where it is B2B, and it's like, okay, well, I'm the head of marketing at this company, which means I've got to deal with this other person in this other department and all, like, yeah, man. And the way the sales cycle changes, which I feel like is a whole other set of conversations, right? Of dealing with, okay, well, now you're talking to multiple people that are involved in the buying process. And how do you deal with that kind of transition from one person to the other in these bigger companies? And you know what I mean? Like there's so many layers to all of this, man, which is what's so exhausting about it on some level. Like, yeah, I always want to have that playbook, like I said, and when everything is so mobile.
It's there.
Yeah.
You have multiple people at the table. Who's your person that's going to help you most at that table? That's the question. And I usually rely on that person. I'll call them separately and say, "Hey, what do you think about this? What do you think about that person? Do you think they're interested, not interested? Do you think what do they need to see? What am I missing?" And as they bring in more people, they start to become your assistant without even trying. They don't realize it. You're just asking questions, and you can tell they're on your side, so they want to help you get in there.
Interesting. Okay, that makes a lot of sense, though. I mean, of course, right? I guess if you got into that point where they decided to bring their, superior or whatever it has to be, then clearly they've invested in it and they've essentially said yes, right? Or yes enough.
Well, and then what's their motivation for doing so? So if their motivation is bringing you in because they're going to look good, they're going to improve something, they're going to whatever, that helps them. So there's their pain. So, even asking that question of, why are you helping me? That kind of thing. What are you looking to try? What's your goal here at the end? Because I want to make sure that I incorporate that into my process with your guys once we get started.
Yeah. Okay. I love this, man. You got me going. This is fun. All right. So for other people then who want to keep up with you and all the sales things that you're talking about, like what is the best way to do that, Rob?
Yeah, Vince, first of all, I appreciate you letting me be on the show with you. And I know we had done a show once on my show. And so my podcast is called The Slow Pitch. You can find it at theslowpitch.com, and you can pretty much find it on most platforms. So, but if you go to theslowpitch.com, you'll find a link to whichever one you like and go from there. You can contact me through that as well.
Yeah. And like Rob just mentioned, there is an episode where I hopped on with you and I talked about a sales problem that I had and we dug deep into it in the details. So I love that conversation and glad we could do that here. So this has been awesome, man. Rob, I really appreciate the time. Thank you so much.
Likewise. Thank you.